Caliza, it's our broader mission is how do we remove barriers to commerce internationally, right? How do you make it such that as if one is interacting with other folks within your own country, how do you simplify the process of international trade and commerce across different regions?
None of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Wagme Ventures or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Hey Wagme family, Benga here with another Wagme Ventures podcast episode. Thanks for joining and listening today. I'll be chatting with Ezra Kebrab. He's the CEO and co-founder of Caliza, a startup that's transforming cross-border payments in Latin America using stablecoins. For anyone who is new, this is the Wagme Ventures podcast where we do snapshots with interesting builders, founders, and investors across crypto and AI. Check out wagmeventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. For now, let's get into it with Ezra. Hey, man, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Benga. It's great to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Sure thing, man. Got to get right into it. You came from legacy financial payments world, so you definitely understand payments well. Talk about your time at Visa and how impactful it's been to your journey of being a founder in crypto.
Yeah, sure thing. I was at Visa for a few years now before leaving to start this company. And there was, I'd say, a few things I picked up on, but one of the most eye-opening or alarming things that really came to light for me was this trend of real-time payments, right? And when I say real-time payments, I mean this is a phenomenon in every country where nearly every central bank has developed or is developing its own instant bank transfer network. And at a bare minimum, they all solve for peer-to-peer transactions, but many of them have even developed or grown to solve for paying merchants, paying invoices and bills, among other use cases, even buy now, pay later over these transfer systems. So to put in context, when I joined Visa in 2017, there were about a dozen countries that had these sort of systems. Today, they're well over 80 and counting. And so we see this proliferating, and I realized there was this gap or a really future opportunity to solve for how do you connect and build the connective tissue between each of these systems. Nothing has really changed on a global scale, I'd say, apart from since Swift had came about now almost north of 50 years ago in the 70s out of Belgium, out of a summit. And so we haven't really seen much to change how we do, I'd say, international transactions on a systematic banking level. And that really stuck with me. And so I decided to leave and build a system that really would connect local payment rails and offer a seamless fashion for instant cross-border settlement between banks.
And that has transitioned to raising $8.5 million from top-tier VCs for your project, Caliza. So talk to us. What is Caliza, and what are you looking to solve?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So Caliza, I'd say it's our broader mission is how do we remove barriers to commerce internationally, right? How do you make it such that as if one is interacting with other folks within your own country, how do you simplify the process of international trade and commerce across different regions? And along that vein, what we've started our effort with is really two staple products. One is a dollar account product where we use our compliance engine to evaluate your customers to give them access to US dollar accounts such that we meet and match the AML or criteria and compliance criteria of the US, but also your local markets. Like, we realized the hard part of giving international treasury products or account products, dollar account products, is ultimately how do you meet local criteria, whether it's the stringent central bank FX policies of Brazil, AML policies of the US, and so on. So we offer dollar accounts. And the second product is the instant cross-border payment product I mentioned, which I often refer to as a settlement product, where we move the funds in real time. We allow you to send us a local transfer within your home country. We handle the FX with our partner banks, the on-ramp, the sending of funds cross-border, the last mile regulatory and tax reportings as well.
Fascinating. Yeah, definitely very disruptive in a space that we know legacy financial rails has not served well, or at least served at an extremely ungodly premium. So can't imagine that it's been easy. But before we talk about the challenges that you've encountered in your journey in building, talk us or walk us through your flow of funds. Like, what does the workflow look like from sender to recipient?
Certainly. So we follow a couple steps, I'd say, in every market that we share in common. So we typically accept the local bank transfer. So let's say that you are, let's call it a Brazilian or no, yeah, Brazilian company that wants to export a product to the US. And you want to send and collect revenue in the US and remit it back to Brazil. The way we will enable that to occur is you can essentially have your customers send you funds via fiat to a local bank account where we're collecting the funds. From there in dollars, we'll on ramp to USDC. We'll send the USDC to Brazil. We'll off ramp into dollars. We'll essentially do an FX transaction. We'll do reportings with the central bank. And after doing the FX to local currency with the help of our bank partners, we'll then do the last mile payout of the PIX transfer. The same goes for the inverse, right? Where you might be sending funds to the US, where we'll take in a bank transfer, a PIX transfer. We'll go from Brazilian real to then US dollars to then USDC, remitting the funds to the US and then off ramping and then doing the local payout to the corresponding banking account. And this goes for every market that we're live in today. Now, in terms of the challenges to get this done, the landscape has dramatically evolved over the last few years. A few years ago, if you came with this notion or idea, there were far more extreme perspectives. I think we found more middle ground now. And there was a perspective of banks that thought that crypto would never touch the financial services or financial institutions. And then there was perspectives from the crypto industry that essentially did not share interest, right? Or also shared this perspective that there's no interest in bridging that gap. I think today we're seeing a whole lot more middle ground where folks see the opportunity as crypto as a tool within the payments landscape, which I find exciting. But there was definitely a lot of education that was involved, right? To get bank partners behind this, to customers that might be more crypto native, right? To be comfortable with some of the exhaustive like due diligence and AML efforts that we'd have to undertake. So really to get all parties aligned was one of the more difficult undertakings, right? Not to mention really building out a robust compliance engine. But I got to say that investment has paid off. It's shown that in recent months, there's been a lot of excitement and interest in the stablecoin market and landscape. And we've noticed this from honestly a ton of non-crypto native players, many of which are the companies that we're pursuing as customers for Caliza.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that the conversation has changed largely over the last few years about what crypto is and how it can work hand in hand with traditional finance, and in many ways, re-architecting what traditional finance is doing today. You spoke about the challenges and how things have gotten better. I imagine there's still things on the regulatory front that you're still working through, or a lot more clarity than it used to be, or maybe not. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Certainly. Yeah, it definitely is contingent on the market. For example, I'll use Brazil. Brazil is very, I'd say, crypto friendly in the sense that the regulators there being at least two bodies that are most relevant, have really opened up to innovation coming from the crypto industry. They have, I'd say, taken a few initiatives, like one of which is obviously the launch of a central bank digital currency, but also the encouragement enablement of other crypto, the idea that, or the notion that they'll start with domestic efforts and eventually figure out how to use these for eventually cross-border international efforts. That does contrast, right, with other countries where it is still a waiting game of the regulators trying to understand crypto a little more before either passing any policies. And in other markets where it's still unclear which regulators, right, will have like domain or oversight of the industry. And like it's certainly understandable given that crypto is such a wide and like there's a full gamut of use cases even beyond payments. And so I can't see any one regulator overseeing each function of, or all functions of crypto. But within the payment space, I think we've seen a lot really come to light, come to fruit, I should say, for the benefit of the space. And so I think we're in far more a hospitable environment, I got to say, for all players that want to touch stablecoins. You're seeing it really treated and trusted among consumers and businesses. And I think that's largely because regulators are now starting to take a positive stand on it.
Hey everybody, quick thing here. We're excited to announce WAGMI Advisory, your home for all things fundraising, hiring, and partnerships. This is all about supercharging your project with the WAGMI network, consisting of over 20,000 executives, investors, and builders in crypto, all ready to come alongside your project to help it succeed. Get in touch at team@wagmiventures.io to learn more and figure out if WAGMI Advisory is the right fit for your project. Let's get back to the show.
Yeah, no, it's pretty encouraging. And I think the only other thing I want to get a sense of is what the competitive landscape looks like. Are there a couple of other players thinking crypto forward in their approach to solving it? Or is Caliza still one of the early leads, if not the lead in LATAM?
Certainly. So I'd say this space of cross-border payments has existed for as long as any of us can imagine, right? But I'm going to use the most recent example I could think of, which is, by recent, I mean 1800s. The oldest cross-border payment company that's still around today is Western Union, right? Western Union's been around since the late 1800s. And what they effectively did was they just opened up bank accounts all over the world and said, we're going to develop this network where we keep pools of cash and we can provide immediate liquidity from our balance sheet to recipients. So Banga wants to send funds from, let's call it from Japan to Ezra in Mexico. What they would enable is they would, once they receive funds from you in Japan, they would then disperse a payment to me locally within Mexico, where I could pick it up as cash or a local bank transfer. Regardless, Western Union needs to make themselves whole. They need to do their own treasury management. And so the way they, like among other companies, right, make themselves whole, the way they have their Japanese entity then fund the Mexican entity is they do a wire transfer. And nearly every player does that today. And when I say that, I mean whether it's a public, private, early stage, late stage, just various ways. They might use their own balance sheet. They might raise debt to go about this. There are just so many different manners. But the way funds actually move cross-border have not been real time to date in financial services and fintech. Crypto is posing this unique opportunity. So talking about the competitive landscape directly, I have seen a few efforts around and who might not necessarily know how to navigate like the various wallets that you get within the crypto world. And so because of this and because of that like importance, a lot of them do not want to sign up for a new product unless it is super simple. When I say super simple, it does not have additional hurdles or ramifications from a regulatory or tax standpoint. And so we've done a lot of that digging, a lot of that work to simplify the process, keep our customers compliant. I got to say, like, we've seen various ways that you can send money cross-border using crypto, but from one wallet or one exchange to another. So it's to say that we haven't seen any players that enable this fiat to fiat where you don't need to download an app, or a consumer app at that, or where you don't need to have a wallet or an exchange or a custodian, right, to enable this. So in that sense, I'd say Caliza's rather unique, but I do find it exciting to see all the developments that are more crypto native per se.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you are seeing that crypto is changing the narrative across Latin America. What are your thoughts on how it's solving real world use cases? I know one of it is cross-border payments, but is there any other one that stands out to you?
Yeah, certainly. So cross-border payments is obviously near and dear to my heart, but also their store of value, right? Which I think is what people initially thought was most important. It is secondary, in my opinion. I think store of value is very, or maybe neck and neck. It depends on who you were talking about, right? From a consumer standpoint, store of value was incredibly important. For businesses, to a degree, yes, but oftentimes businesses are able to store value in other markets or countries But their most difficult challenge is actually moving the money because there might be delays in paying a supplier. That case of the wire transfer I mentioned, where you're doing treasury management among two of your entities, right? Where you might be exporting a product to the US or importing from Mexico, and you need to fund your local entity for operations, and that's time sensitive to do payroll or whatever it might be. And so, apart from cross border, definitely store value started within the consumer world, but we're seeing that become more and more interesting to businesses as they start to gain more trust and are kind of crossing this chasm of risk tolerance, right? And education on the safety and reliability of crypto.
Great, great. And I'm thinking of how LATAM, and particularly Brazil, is embracing crypto. And recently, the Brazilian Central Bank established guidelines for the issuance of digital Brazilian currency, which I think has been briefly abbreviated as DREX. Brazil's vision is to move all the settlements on chain with DREX, which is a CBDC. Are you a fan of CBDC? Do you have any thoughts on this in general and where you think the DREX project in Brazil is going? I'm thinking more like from a success perspective.
Certainly. So we, at the end of the day with Caliza, we've built our product to be stablecoin or CBDC agnostic, meaning USDC is really the staple or the bedrock which we've built upon. And we're excited to also, I'd say, explore other stablecoins that will eventually offer yield, among other things. But when it comes to DREX in particular, I'm very excited about what the Brazilian Central Bank, Bansen, has developed. As I mentioned, they're very progressive, have developed a world-class domestic payment product in the form of PIX, which, interestingly enough, PIX was really heavily modeled after UPI, India's own domestic payment system. So I have confidence in what they're developing. I think the challenge with CBDCs is a fewfold, right? While I have excitement for them and I have strong belief and faith in what's being built in Brazil, it's only once you start talking about it outside of the context of Brazil or other countries, it's also contingent on other countries developing similarly successful CBDCs. So that is the bet, right? Is that there is going to be I'd say a framework in which all these CBDCs are mirrored and matched and speak to each other without any sort of friction in the process. So I think that's still TBD, right? How these CBDCs start to work and interoperate with each other cross-border. But on a domestic level, I'm certainly a big fan of what's come about to date.
Yeah, I definitely feel that Brazil is much more advanced in some of the other countries that are considering a digital currency for their central banks or issued by their central banks. And yeah, excited to see how they drive this moving forward. Thinking about forward, what are the next big milestones for Caliza? What's on your roadmap, and what big features or what big things are you looking out for?
Great question. It's fascinating. We really built for core markets, US, Brazil, and Mexico. And while we have international ambitions, we're being drawn there globally sooner than we anticipated, right? Like, we've had a lot of customers that have pushed us on the corridors to Asia. And that's large part because of the nearshoring that's happening in Mexico, where many parts and items might be sourced from Hong Kong and various Asian markets and then exported to the US. There's also, or even just funding from Asian entities, but there's also within Brazil a massive import industry from Asia as well. And so we've noticed the need to really solve for settlement in these markets, which I got to say is expedited the need for Hong Kong, Singapore, eventually Japan, among others. So I'd say that's on deck for Caliza next, among other products. I'd also say, again, big fan of the notion of offering yield-bearing stablecoins to users, our users being businesses. It's great to see that many of them are reflecting the underlying T-bill rate that they're getting from the Treasury. And so that's another thing we're excited to launch. We've been carefully monitoring all the various options and also just gauging customer interest, and we've seen that growing, which is another segment we're excited to lean into.
That's awesome. Wow. All right. Now we're going to switch and ask, what else in crypto outside of payments excites you?
No, that's a good question. I've probably talked about payments nonstop the last few minutes. So I actually am very keen on the day that governments start to use crypto, particularly for titles and deeds. I cannot tell you how nerve-wracking it is to have to keep a paper title for, like, I'm a big motorcycle fiend. And so whether it's for my motorcycle or whether it's like my birth certificate or these sort of documents, as a human being, these are the easiest things that I get nervous about, of like, that might wake you up in the middle of the night of, did I remember to stash my birth certificate in this place, or the social security card, or XYZ location? And it's typically government issued documents that I'm most keen on having some form of digital copy of. And so obviously there are some risks to digital copies that aren't secured. And so I think there's an opportunity there with smart contracts to really validate that there's one owner or a holder, right? And also enabling this to be passed on, whether you're selling your vehicle, your house, you name it. But that's a use case that I would be very keen to see develop further.
Oh, fantastic. It's been awesome having you on, Ezra, and really, passionate about this particular space. I see crypto with high rates of adoption in the global South, and this is one of the more powerful areas where it's providing direct social impact to the population there. So really appreciate what you're doing there and very supportive of it, and will continue to be. Thanks for coming on, and have a great one.
Thank you, Benga. Thank you for having me, and definitely excited to be here with the WAGMI team.
Sounds good. All right, brother. Talk to you soon.
All right, sir.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, go ahead and give us a good 5-star rating and subscribe wherever you're getting your podcasts so you can get all the latest conversations from the most interesting founders, builders, and investors from across the world. Thanks so much, and have a good one.